Really?
Okay. We talked about this slide, right? We were talking about worldviews, okay? Remember how we got here. This whole thing came from the existence or non-existence of universals. Yeah? And we were talking about, question?
Sorry, was there one thing, the lens? Looking at the lens. Or worldviews. Yeah, it's worldviews.
Like that, and then worldviews.
The lens.
We do that?
Yeah,
And then did we get to the puzzle, right? Yeah, we talked about the puzzle at the very end. Yeah, we talked about the puzzle.
Yeah, you talked about, we were about to get to a
Yeah,
part
my
that
son
you
put together
said-
the puzzle pieces, right, okay. Yeah. So remember we're talking about, we started by talking about whether or not universals exist, okay? Because if they don't, then that has implications on a lot of things, right? We talked about implications on morals, implications on communication was the big one, right? So this kind of bleeds into then a conversation about worldviews, because if you don't think, I mean, it's not like some people walk around thinking, oh, universals exist. No, they don't exist. Therefore, I'm going to go buy a Big Mac. I mean, they don't think through those things, right? There's lots of things in our lives that we just know or that we just think that are more about the way that we are, like who we are as a person, rather than what we're thinking through, like this plus this equals this, therefore, right? We rarely do that, okay? But we do operate according to a set of something. And we operate according to something, and so this is what that something is, okay, a worldview. And the loss of universals or the denial of universals leads to the denial of absolutes, which is a worldview that will put you in drastically different places than somebody with a worldview with absolutes. Okay, so that's how we kind of got into this whole worldview thing, right? So now I was explaining to you what a worldview was, and we talked about how it's kind of like a puzzle, right? And Kaylee, I think, brought up the coherentism, right? It's kind of like that, a web, okay? Worldviews are kind of like webs. Now, coherentism looked at everything about you, okay, and everything that you know, right? Everything about you is a web. Worldviews is just like, this is the lens through which you see the world. These are the assumptions you have, okay? You can think about that as a web. I prefer to think about it as a puzzle piece, because if your puzzle is good, if you have all the pieces and you put it together right, then it creates a picture of reality, okay? If your pieces are good, you have them all, and you put it together right, that picture of reality will be accurate, meaning it will match with what's actually real. Your life will be so much smoother, right, if your picture matches reality. So you need to go back and look. If it's not jiving, okay, then you need to go back, and sometimes I do this too, right? I think I have a pretty good worldview, pretty coherent, like it sticks together, and I think it's pretty accurate. But every once in a while, I go back and revisit it and be like, are all these things, is this what I want to think? Is this really what I think? Am I living by what I think? Or am I just saying this is what I think and then living another way, right? Which is what a lot of us do a lot of times. So to go back and look at your worldview, the pieces of your worldview is a really valuable exercise. So if it isn't accurate, if it's not complete, it's in a pile of pieces, and you know how you got to start a puzzle, right? You got to turn them all over so you can see everything. If it's just in a pile, this is going to lead to frustration. Not day to day. It's not like, oh, I'm frustrated because my worldview is not accurate, right? Nobody says that, okay? But generally speaking in your life, there's going to be lots of points of tension where just you can't seem to get it done, or things are just not working, or you can't understand people, or people don't understand you, or right? It's kind of that angsty life, okay? That's what I'm talking about. If your worldview is not set, then your life is just going to kind of have this doesn't seem to fit, okay? So here's some examples of some worldviews. Oh, no. First, we talked about how the worldviews are competing. We talked about this because you can't just say all worldviews are good, because the worldviews do compete, okay? They do have competing claims, so they can't all be true. So you got to pick one that best matches reality. Here are some options. Now remember we talked about how all religions are worldviews, but not all worldviews are religions. Because you're going to have some religious talk in here, okay? There are some religions that are monotheistic, okay? That means, mono means one, so we're talking about one God, okay? One divine being inside the claims of the religion. Okay, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam will fall into these categories. These are ones that you'll be familiar with, okay? Polytheism, poly means many. So there are going to be some worldviews that within the worldview, they say there are multiple divine beings.
We need to write that.
Yeah. multiple divine beings, okay? There's also pantheism, okay? Pantheism. Pan means all or everything, okay? So that means all is God. So created things, non-created things, physical things, non-physical things, all of those things are God.
Like the next God.
All things have a divine essence, we'll put it that way, okay? Then that next word should say panentheism, okay? P-A-N-E-N, P-A-N-E-N theism, panentheism, okay? And that means all is in God. So it's kind of like that monism that we talked about, right? Where there's one all-encompassing reality and everything else aren't really real things. They're just expressions of that one reality. That's kind of what monism is, okay? Panentheism, all is in God. So really the only thing that really exists is God as a reality, okay? And then everything else is kind of expressions of that. Not necessarily a personal being here. In here or in here, okay? In pantheism or panentheism, no, not really personal divine beings. In polytheism and monotheism, we have personal divine beings, okay? Then you have something called that we exit the religious worldviews, okay, into worldviews that are not religious. Okay, they don't make religious claims about afterlife or divinity or anything like that. One of them, a worldview, is called postmodernism. This is the worldview probably of my generation. You all are kind of the products of that, but you also have one foot, a couple of toes in it. Okay, you're kind of coming out of that. Probably what we have now is postmodernism. Okay. Sometimes people really, I think, a little, what do you call that? When it's kind of a loaded statement. I don't know. I feel like it has some kind of overly negative connotations. They call it anti-realism because postmodernism is the view that you create your own reality. Kind of, but it goes beyond you saying what is right and wrong into this is real. This is what's really happening. So basically what it ends up happening is you've got this person who says this is what reality is, this person who says this is what reality is, this person, and you have a bunch of people in bubbles. Have you seen the movie WALL-E? Where all the people are like real fat and they're sitting in those chairs with bubbles around them? Right? That's what I'm talking about. You have your own little reality. Okay, there's zero communication, zero, right?
Robots feed people.
Scary, okay? Postmodernism. I will say a little note quickly, because I got a lot to cover about postmodernism, is that they have the one thing that will not die about postmodernism, it's a bad theory, but the one thing that won't die is a system of interpreting literature and talking about language called deconstructionism. I think we may have talked about this way at the beginning of the semester. We're talking about like Derrida and Foucault and those guys. Deconstructionism says, step one, take away everything you know about the author, about the type of writing, about why they wrote, when they wrote, take away everything you know about that. Step two, insert whatever you want in there, and that becomes what the text means. So if I'm a feminist, I'm going to insert feminist rhetoric into the text, and that's going to be what the text really does mean. Not just to me, but to everybody. However, I also hold that someone else, right, as a Marxist, okay, is going to insert whatever they think into that text, and that becomes what the text really means at the same time. Somebody who is a lot more geared towards socialism. Karl Marx, socialism, as a political and philosophical theory. So if I'm about that, right? If I'm a socialist, I'm going to put socialist agendas, right, into that. I'm going to read that into the text. Okay, I'm going to say, oh, this text is obviously about insert socialist rhetoric here. Okay, but if I'm a feminist, right? If I'm a lesbian, I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, I'm going to insert lesbian rhetoric into the text, and that's going to be exactly what it means. But not just for me. I'm not saying, oh, this is what it means for me. This is how I'm reading it. Like, it's personal to me. This text is meaningful to me. We say that all the time, and that's cool. Like, we connect with certain poems or songs or whatever. I'm not saying that as a deconstructionist. I'm saying this is literally what it means for me and for you and for you and for you. However, I also hold that you're doing the same thing with your socialist agenda or your, right, I don't know, whatever. LGBTQ. I mean, I don't know, right? Pick your worldview, okay? inserting that into the text, and that becomes what it means. So yes, it means what I think it means, and it really does mean what you think it means, and you think it means, and you at the same time. It's bananas. It's bananas, okay? What it doesn't mean is anything that the author wanted it to mean. That's the only thing we all agree on. Right?
Why'd he write the book?
Yeah. Now, it's a fun exercise, yeah, but it totally destroys anything that the author meant. And it all becomes about what you want it to be, okay? And that's a good exercise maybe in, like, comparing ideas and, like, coming to different, points of view on other people's worldviews. But as far, that's different than saying this is what the text means. That's pretty crazy. I will tell you, though, that is still alive and well. Last year, I took several literature courses to keep my credentialing for teaching English on a college level. I took English literature courses, and this was from, I don't mind telling you because it's a great school, Northwestern Oklahoma State out in Alva. They have a campus in Enid as well. But out there, awesome, great school, great instructors. But that's what they do. In my 20th century American Lit class, very little about, I won't say nothing, but very little about what the author meant. It was all about what do you think it is. Never mind what the author thought. What is it saying to you? Hell, I don't care. I want to know why he wrote it, right? There's all sorts of, we talk about all the history and culture around it, and then say, what do you think it means? It was ridiculous. It was a great class, but I was like, what is happening? So, if you go to any other major university, this is what you'll hear in your literature classes. Okay? Postmodernism. Okay, naturalism is the next one. This is the biggie right now, I would say. Okay? The biggie. It could be philosophical naturalism, which is probably where most people are, or just ontological, metaphysical naturalism, where people think that it is, but they don't really live that way. Okay? But philosophical naturalism is probably where most of you live. Probably. Okay? So this has really big impacts into something called the mind-body problem. Okay, the mind-body problem. Now we've talked in and around this a bunch in this class about minds and souls and how they're related to bodies, right? We've had these discussions in this class, okay? This is a chart showing you all your options, okay? But philosophical naturalism will differ at the very beginning. So by mind-body problem, we mean, are there two parts to us or just one? Okay? And if there are two parts to us, how do they interact, and what are those two parts like? Okay? So there are a couple of different answers, different ways you can go with that, and this is where naturalists and people like me who are dualists separate. Okay? So at the very beginning, you see you've got physicalism and dualism as your two opposites. What is the answer to the mind-body problem? Either we are one part and we're all physical, because clearly we can see the physical part, right? We're one part and we're physical, or we're two parts and one part is not physical. You clear? Okay? All physical and one part, physical and non-physical in two parts. So you see the dual, right? Dual meaning two parts, okay? Dualism over here, physicalism over here, okay? Underneath physicalism, we don't talk about it in this class because it's more metaphysics than we need to deal with. But there are two different theories, okay, about exactly what type of physical thing we are. It's called the identity theory, and it's called functionalism. Okay, you can look them up if you want to. It's pretty interesting. On the dualist side, though, we also have two different ways to go. Okay, you have substance dualism and property dualism. Okay, substance dualism and property dualism. Now, knowing that you know what a substance is and what a property is, how do you think those would differ? We're talking dualism. Okay, so that means there's two parts to us, this side thinks. There's two parts, a physical part and a non-physical part. Physical is the body, non-physical is the mind or soul. Okay, if you're a substance dualism, what do you think substance dualists think? Substance dualists.
That the mind is a physical object within our reality.
Okay, close, but no. Substance dualist.
That the soul is actually made of something.
Okay, closer. Closer. Go ahead.
That it's its own identity?
What do you mean by identity?
Or not,
I mean, you're close.
Yeah, like we're not just part of the same thing. It's actually like its own individual thing.
Good. Substance dualist. Two substances. One's a physical substance. One is a non-physical substance. Okay?
They treat them as both individuals.
Yes. Okay? We're made of two substances. A physical substance and a non-physical substance. And they interact. Okay? Substance dualist. Now, let's talk about property dualists. What do you think property dualists think?
Kind of the opposite of that.
Which would be what?
That they are actually just part of the same thing.
Okay, and what's different about them? Because we are a dualist, right? So how do we separate out the two? Not according to their substances, but according to their properties. Okay, according to their properties. So instead of saying that there is a literal physical substance and a literal metaphysical substance called the mind or the soul, okay, that'd be substance dualism. Property dualists say it's the same substance, really. It's the same substance, but they have different properties. Okay? So the property of your mind that's able to like reason and, have intellect, will, volition, right? Those, the seat of your rational faculties, that's just the property of that part of you. Okay? The other properties would be like your height and weight and stuff like that, right? Those would be your physical properties. Your non-physical properties would be intellect, will, and emotion. Okay? So, substance dualism, property dualism. Okay? So, the two big answers to the mind-body problem are either physicalism or dualism. Now, it's not, this is an open question, okay? It's not settled. There are really smart people on both sides, okay? Really well-read, really educated, okay? So, it could go either way, but look, it boils down to, it really does, and look at the implications it can have on your worldview. If you don't think that you're a dualist, what all worldviews does that throw out immediately?
All religious.
All religious worldviews, right? So all religious worldviews are out, okay? There are a few people that I know that are religious and are physicalists, and the way they bend around that is really crazy. I'm not sure I understand it, but I know that they claim to be physicalists and they claim to be religious, which is really interesting to me. Yeah, that's my face too, like, what? Okay, so look at what impact that one question has, that one metaphysical question has on your worldview. Okay, whether or not you think you as a person, are one substance or two.
So where do you fall?
I'm a dualist and I'm a substance dualist.
Do you go any further down than that?
Well, yeah, I'm probably over here in the Cartesian substance dualism, but that's way too complicated for right now. We won't talk about it. But they're different, like they're basically just small nuances between the two, or three, I mean. But emergent substance dualism, for example, these three have to deal with these three have nuances that deal with exactly how, if your substance dualism, your two substances, how do those substances interact? Like, is it some sort of metaphysical glue that sticks your mind or soul to your body? I mean, where does it live? Like, it's not in an organ somewhere, right? So, like, where is it? How does it stay with your body? That's a real question and a real difficult one. And each of those three have varying answers to that. Emergent, for example, says that your mind or soul emerges out of it's a byproduct of the physical interactions in your body. So it really does produce another substance, but because your physical body produces a non-physical substance called a mind, that's how they're related, that's how they interact with each other. This one is a product of another. That's not me, but that is a valid theory. Okay, so those three give you like little nuances on how those integrate. Does that make sense, kind of? You see how it gets real thick in a hurry? Like, yeah. So you're welcome for saving you from all of that. Other questions about mind-body problem? If I asked you, what are the two big answers to the mind-body problem? Could you tell me?
Yeah.
Physicalism and dualism.
Yeah, and could you explain them?
Physicalism is all about everything that is
Physicalism claims we are
One substance.
One.
and if that substance is,
Physical.
okay? Dualism claims we are,
Which is one is non-physical.
one is physical, one's not physical.
Yep.
Good. Okay, so speaking of physicalism, if you're a physicalist or a naturalist, here is the complicated, don't have to write it down. Here's the complicated definition. Physicalism or naturalism claims the spatio-temporal, or space and time, right, cosmos containing physical objects studied by the hard sciences is all there is. That is a bold claim. The spatio-temporal cosmos containing physical objects studied by the hard sciences is all there is, and that the hard sciences are either the only source of knowledge or they are vastly superior in proffering rationally justified beliefs compared to non-scientific fields. Okay? If you got 70% of that, you should be super happy with yourself. If you're like, yeah, I think I know what that means, good work. That's enough. Okay? Here's, comes from pre-Socratic philosophers. I don't think you need to know this. I mean, you need to know it, but for the test, I mean, you know. It comes from pre-Socratic philosophers. This is the, so it's been around for a while, this is the going theory for modern science. In a textbook definition of science, as those of you that have my husband, he will attest to, is that this is their definition of science, is that it's just the hard sciences, right? Anything that can be studied by the scientific method, it can be measured, it can be weighed, it can be observed with our senses, okay? That, it claims, those are the only things you can know for real. Those are the only things you can really know. Therefore, the scientific method is then elevated as the way of gaining knowledge, because that's the only stuff you can really know, is stuff you can measure with the hard science, with the hard sciences. By hard sciences, I mean biology, chemistry, physics, okay? Psychological, so that means, according to this, everything that is real is physical, okay? So reality, to turn it on its head, reality only consists of matter, not non-physical things, only physical things, okay? Psychological or moral or social things are consequences of physical things. See, we can't get away from the fact that psychological, moral, and social things do exist, even if we're physicalists or naturalists, right? We see that there are non-physical things that happen, like psychology and morality, right? We see that there are love and stuff like that. We see that there are non-physical things that happen, so we got to explain that somehow. So as a naturalist, we say that's a consequence of physical things. Okay, they aren't real things, they're consequences of physical things. So basically it says all things can be reduced to the physical, or another way of saying that, something really important to us like love is a certain pattern of neurons firing. Okay?
In the definition, it says, it doesn't necessarily say that the other ones can't be true. It just says in their theory that this one is more superior.
It says either. Depends on if you're a hard physicalist or not. Like right here. Hard scientists are either the only source of knowledge or at least they're vastly superior. Some people think they're the only source. Many, many do. And some people think they're vastly superior. I'd say it's probably 70-30. Most physicalists think that hard scientists are the only source of real knowledge. Yeah, a good catch. Yeah. Okay, so does that make sense to you? I mean, coming from that viewpoint, it makes sense, right? There are such things as psychological, moral, and social things, but because there are no non-physical things, because we can't measure them with the scientific method, then these things that are real must be consequences of physical things, because physical things are the only things that really exist. So, love, or what we know as love, is just a certain pattern of neurons firing. Some people are really comfortable with that because it can be measured, it can be observed, right? Some people are really not. Okay,
That makes a little sense.
it makes a little sense. It doesn't make enough sense for me, but it makes a little sense.
Well, they say that everything else only exists because the physical exists. I mean, would we still have an afterlife or a soul or anything if there wasn't a world or life?
Yeah, we talked about this, right? I think you missed this conversation with Harry afterwards. Who was I having it with? Van and somebody, Terry maybe?
Yeah.
Where we were talking about, can a metaphysical world exist if there's no physical world?
And we started that.
Right. We did. Well, we finished it in the hallway, or at least continued it for a little bit. My view is yes, you can have, I mean, can we picture a universe that's not, let's do a possible world scenario. Could we picture a possible world where there is nothing physical, it's all metaphysical? Clearly it would be different than this world. I won't even say it would look different because we wouldn't be able to see it with our eyes because we wouldn't have eyes because they're physical, right? But it doesn't seem to define any logical rules. So I think it's possible there could be a metaphysical world without any physical world as a reference point.
That gets kind of sticky though, 'cause without really life, how how would there be life?
Well, it depends on how you're defining life, right? If you're defining life as biological life, then you're probably a naturalist or physicalist, right? In which case, that kind of life wouldn't exist. But a dualist will explain life in more than one way, right? They will say there's biological life and then there's this soul life or this consciousness, right? That's not necessarily tied to the biological life. And that could possibly survive the death, the biological death of the body.
Wouldn't most judges and everything have to have a naturalist viewpoint? Like you can murder somebody and have like a half-life sentence, like, oh, you just killed their physical half, their soul.
But their consciousness is fine, yeah.
It's only 7 years to get around that.
Okay, really quick. Dualism goes way back to Descartes. Remember, a lot of stuff goes back to Descartes, if you haven't noticed, but I think, therefore I am, right? He doubted even his senses, okay? He threw out any information that his senses could give him because he's like, it may be fooling me. Or maybe the evil demon, right, is out there toying with me, okay? So he threw all of that out, but there still was this consciousness, which is a non-physical thing. So therefore that exists, and then from there we could discover that our interactions with the physical world are also reliable, so therefore we have non-physical and physical. Okay, that's how he arrived at the dualism part. So reality consists of two things, mind and matter. The mind and body coexist as separate entities. Okay, he was a substance dualist. They're separate entities. Epiphenomenalism, that's a big word you can use to impress your friends, is kind of like the emergent substance dualism, right? Where the emergent theory where the mind is like a byproduct of the body. Okay, that's epiphenomenalism is a fancy word for that. Okay. Yep, we already talked about this. Comes in two types. Oh, this is a really good definition. I wish I would have read it. Property dualism, physical properties, and mental properties originating from the brain. Okay? So, physicalism versus dualism. Here they are side by side. Under physicalism, man is simply, now simply doesn't, there's no negative connotation there, it just is, okay? Man is simply an animal. Brains are simply chemical systems. Really advanced ones. Really complex and complicated ones. But, in the end, chemical systems alone. There are no souls, okay? Under dualism, the mental is separate from the physical, okay? Mental exists, for one thing, and separate from the physical, and the mind and soul can possibly pre-exist the body and possibly survive the body's death, okay? They also believe in people that are dualists have space in their worldview for an afterlife and space for paranormal activity. Now, don't have to, right? But that allows for it. That worldview allows for that.
Physicalism, we have actual space, like outer space.
Well, and here you do too. It's just that's the physical part.
Physicalism depends on which side of it you are.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh man, this is really good stuff. Why did I say? Okay, yeah, we got time. We can do this. Okay, hang with me. We got this, and we got we got this. We got 3 more slides. This one and 2 more. Okay, we're close. Hang with me because this is sweet. So look, Leibniz. This is a good word. Leibniz's law of the indiscernibility of identicals. Okay, this is how it goes. Take any entities x and y. This is explaining to you what I'm doing here is explaining to you why I'm a dualist. Okay, take any entities x and y if x and y are identical. That means that any truth that applies to x applies to y because they're identical. Okay, so anything that's true of x is true of y. If one thing is true of x and not true of y, then they're not identical. Okay, if one thing is possibly true of x but actually true of y, then they can't be identical. You see that? That's why it's called the indiscernibility of identicals. You shouldn't be able to discern between identicals. Okay, y'all I'm sure met a set of identical twins. Is anybody a twin in here? No? Okay. Set of identical twins. I've told you before my favorite people in college was a set of identical twins that people could not tell apart. Right? I could tell them apart instantly because they're not really truly identical, right? There were some things that were true of Josh that were not true of Nathaniel. Okay, and some things that were true of Nathaniel not true of Josh. So they're not really identical, but he's saying if they truly are identical, there won't be any difference between them. Okay? If something is not true here and is true here, then they're not really identical. Does that make sense? Okay. So here's an example. Jim Dompier's oldest child, let's take that as X. And Sarah Brown, let's take that as Y. Okay? I'm going to tell you now, I am Jim Dompier's oldest child. My dad's name. Okay? So, sweet last name though, right? Swap it for Brown, but yeah. Okay, so, glad to swap it for Brown. So, Jim Dompier's oldest child is Sarah Brown. X and Y. Are there anything that's different between those two things? Is there one thing that's true of Jim Dompier's oldest child that is not true of Sarah Brown?
Yeah.
Like what?
I don't know y'all, but yeah.
No, because I am
You are
Jim
his oldest
Dompier's
child.
oldest child.
So no. You
Right?
like,
Sarah
X
Brown and Jim Dompier's oldest child are the
X
same
and
person
Y
as me.
are identical.
I thought you were talking about you versus them.
No?
Sorry.
His oldest child, which is me. Okay? And Sarah Brown.
Which is why.
Oh.
No, because no matter what I'm wearing, no matter where I am in the world, no matter how my accent sounds, because now they all tease me and think I sound like I'm from the South, and everybody down here is like, you sound like you're from the North, so I don't know where I belong. Okay, but no matter what, these two entities, X and Y, are always going to be the same. You can't find something that's true of Jim Dompier's oldest child and false for Sarah Brown. Why? Because they're identical. It's me. Does that make sense? The indiscernibility of identicals. You can't have one thing that's true of one and not true of the other if they're true identicals. Okay? So, this explains to you, well, so what? Okay? Physicalism claims that mental entities, okay, physicalism, right? We're one physical substance. Physicalism claims that mental entities are identical to physical identities. Physical entities, sorry. Say that again. Mental entities are identical to physical entities. So, mental is the X, physical is the Y, and it's saying there's nothing that's true of X that's not also true of Y. Everything that's true of the mental is also true of the physical. Okay? That's what physicalism claims. Does that make sense to you? Okay? Indiscernibility, but they're identical. They're the same thing. Because there aren't two substances, there's only one. Okay? According to physicalism. So everything that is true of the brain is also true of the mind, according to physicalism. Because the brain and the mind is just another word for brain. Okay? But if we can find one thing that's true of the mind that is not true of the brain, what does that mean?
Or physicalism, yeah.
Why? What really, you jump to the conclusion, but what, back up a little, what's true?
They must be separate if there's difference. They're not identical.
Good, very good, very good. They must not really be the same thing because there's one thing that's true of this that's not true of this. Does that make sense? Okay? Okay. So, if it's true, exactly what Justice said, if we can find one thing that's true of the mind that's not true of the brain, then physicalism is false. It is. The whole theory is bad. Okay? And the only other option is dualism is true.
Well, that's not a lot of options.
Relativism
Nope.
is bad.
Yeah, relativism is bad. Okay, so again, so what? Now, I'm not telling you what you should think. You need to investigate that. You know where I stand, but you can investigate that on your own, okay? But this has really big implications on your worldview. Perhaps more than your moral views, okay? More than your religious views. This informs your moral and religious view. If you think you are one substance or two, that informs how you see the world in a very large part. So I would suggest you figure it out and come to a conclusion. If you're not for sure, go with one that you think is true until you have a good reason to think otherwise. Okay? But have thought about that. Have that straight in your head at least a little bit.
So,
know where you stand on that issue.
If you're dualist and you feel like you're two separate entities, if you would.
Mm-hmm.
If you die and you're basically just left with one part of you, or you still believe you're going to be the exact same person?
Yes. So, because remember what our definition of person is.
Well, all right. So if you're going to be the same, if you're dead or alive, then why are they separate? Why are they not identical?
Why is what not identical?
Your mind versus body. Your mind and body.
Because they're different substances.
But if you're the same, whether you're one or the other, then they're identical, which means they're the same.
No. Being the same person and having two substances that are identical are two different things.
But if you're only left with one substance, are you still the same person that was two substances?
Yeah, because what makes me a person is the metaphysical substance. So if my body dies, then that
Right.
doesn't affect. Now it affects my personhood in the sense that, like, you know, the biological part of me, which is a really important part, is gone. You know what I mean? But like, as far as me being me with like my personality, my intellect, my will, my emotions, I mean, that's obviously not going to be expressed physically because I no longer have a physical body, but it's still me because my rational faculties are housed, you know, under my belief, or my rational faculties are housed not in my physical nature, but in my metaphysical substance. Good question. Okay, has huge implications on your worldview. When you think through this, make sure to ask yourself, does it correspond to reality? As far as we know, that's the best theory of truth. So that's what you start to run things by. Does it correspond with reality? Okay? Are all of your pieces there of your worldview? Okay? Are all of your pieces there? If they're not, go find them. Don't be content with just like, you know, I got these big chunks missing, but who cares? They're not important. They are all important because that whole picture is going to inform your worldview. And if you see a puzzle at any point, right? If you see a puzzle and this piece is missing, that's not a great puzzle. Or somebody didn't care about it enough to keep all the pieces together. Or, right? It's not a good thing. Okay? Have a complete, coherent puzzle that paints a good picture of reality. Woo! Made it!
Yay!
Good work. Good work. Made it through metaphysics. Okay. Do you want to look at the study guide for just a second? We got like 6 minutes. Are we okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know.
So there's really much time.